Hi, good morning. My name is Kendra McRae, and today we'll be talking about deploying Tableau Online using a phased approach for small and medium-sized businesses. Before we get started, I wanted to quickly introduce myself. Like I said, I'm Kendra McRae. I'm a Seattle native and a Georgia transplant. I'm the founder and CEO of Lemotus, which is a consulting company that specializes in data, analytics, and experimentation. Prior to that, I was the executive director of analytics and insights at Ramsey Solutions. I did finance at Georgia Pacific, and I cut my teeth in analytics at Deloitte Consulting. I'm extremely passionate about data, analytics, Shih Tzus named Mimi, and anything and all things technology. So what this talk is about is how we were able to deploy Tableau Online in such a way that created significant buzz around data at a company where data didn't necessarily have the best reputation. So you'll walk away with understanding the windy path that was taken during the discovery and deployment phases of Tableau Online, what to look for in a BI platform, and how to overcome hurdles that will inevitably happen along your journey. There we go. So before jumping into all that good stuff, I thought it would be helpful to level set about the type of company that we're talking about. But the principles that we'll discuss can actually apply to companies of any size. So this is a small business that is built around a media personality with a wide variety of digital and physical products and services. Data lives everywhere and comes from a wide variety of sources, and tangible value is at the forefront of any technology investment that they make. So things have to make dollars in order for them to make sense there. And then most importantly, this company is in the middle of a transition from being a primarily analog company with a major radio show and physical products like books and DVDs to being a largely digital one. So data went from being this relatively scarce resource to something that they're swimming in, and arguably one could say that they're drowning in it too. And so to help with all this data and recognizing that data can enable a world where decisions are made faster and better than ever before, the company heavily invested in analytics 3 years ago. So the use of data was starting to pick up across the organization, particularly within the digital marketing, sales operations, and product departments. However, there was one slight problem with this golden age of data, and I'm sure that a lot of you guys will probably, this will resonate with you, is the process to getting to information, even for the most simple requests, felt like climbing Mount Everest, right? So you may think I'm being a little bit of a drama queen, which I do have a flair for dramatics. My former team members can kind of attest to that. But definitely accessing information was a headache and a half, and it did feel like you were scaling a mountain. So just to kind of break down what that actually looked like, well, first some business stakeholder goes to a dev or an analyst and asks a seemingly innocent, basic question about what's going on in their business, or they need a quick little report. So the analyst or dev does some SQL wizardry to hit the web of databases that has all those beautiful ones and zeros, so they can go ahead and answer that question. Then the analyst or the dev spends even more time toiling away at SQL Server reporting services, aka SSRS, to create some aesthetically challenged looking report in that program, right? And then they deliver that report to the stakeholder, praying and hoping with all their might that that person does not have a change to the initial requirements that they had when they started this journey maybe a couple of days ago, potentially, right? And so then when you multiply this process, because it doesn't sound so bad when you kind of like put it into 4 steps, but when you multiply this process by a few hundred times over the course of 2 decades, the next thing you know, you're handing out SSRS reports like candy at Halloween, and you have 1,200 reports for an 800-person company. So you can kind of see that there was probably more than one report for each person that actually worked there, and I would say that probably less than a quarter of those reports were actually utilized on any kind of meaningful cadence, right? So it was a big pile of trash. So when we see looking at that process, we can obviously spot some obvious issues, right? Because it's a crazy level of effort just to get to information. The first and most important one is that there was a dependency on coding skills, right, to even get to basic information. And so you had to know SQL to do it. And so the issue with that is that most business stakeholders, like marketers, product managers, tech support, whatever, are not SQL wizards, right? And so you have to have a dev or an analyst have bandwidth in order to get your questions answered. So this created a twofold issue. The first one was for the analytics team, right? So they had to spend a big chunk of their time on low-value requests just to do the basics. And instead of like the more advanced stuff that actually drives value for the organization, like predictive modeling, churn analysis, et cetera, right? The second issue was for the organization itself. It sent the message that data was not accessible, and so therefore stakeholders were justified in not utilizing data for their decision making or understanding their customers, right? And so that was kind of the do loop of sadness related to just having this dependency and this bottleneck on tech skills. The next issue related to this, our process or SSRS reporting is that data blending was this path of infinite sadness, right? Like I'm not sure how many of you guys are familiar with SSRS reports? Okay, so you know that kind of blending some like on-prem, cloud, and all of the wide variety of the sources is just kind of a sad little situation, and that's probably an understatement of the year. And so without some major hacks, SSRS reporting just wasn't built for the wide variety of data sources that we used every day to run the business. And then also outputs look like Pinterest fails, right? Like no one was writing home letters to their mom talking about how proud they were of whatever they built. Many of the existing reporting was just an endless stream of data tables. And the issue with that, beyond the fact that it kind of looked ugly, was that like data tables, especially when they're endless streams of them, can be relatively distracting, and it's very difficult to highlight what's actually happening in that business and for stakeholders to understand where the opportunities for improvement actually existed. And also, the reports offered little flexibility in what was being shown or even the level of interactivity that a user could have with their data. And then here's the biggest one. This is my biggest hang up with this entire process, is that with the mass proliferation of reports over a couple of decades, there was little to no governance, right? So no one knew how accurate the data was, where it came from, the last time it was refreshed, who built that report, who commissioned it. I mean, like the questions go on, right? And so the issue with that is there was a lot of different numbers for the same metric. So one report would say that leads were down 5%. The next report would say leads are up 2%. Well, this was incredibly frustrating and probably had the most damaging impact on data-driven culture. The data couldn't be trusted, and so people went with their gut, even if their gut was really just pizza from the night before. So as the analytics team, we had to do something, right? Ambassadors of the data-driven decision culture. So these issues kind of made it feel like we were swimming upstream, taking one step forward and 2 steps back, and kind of living on the more advanced side of the analytic spectrum, and not needing to be reporting squirrels or reconciling dueling reports every day of the week, right? And so what we did was we had to find the right business intelligence platform that would meet our needs now and those that we would have in the future. But one doesn't simply just start with a discovery process. That is if you want to avoid some drama down the line. In the past, I've seen some non-IT people try to take on an evaluation by themselves, and then at the point that they get to implementation, then they want to bring in their IT friends. That's a recipe for disaster. So do yourself a favor and don't do this. So if this is the only takeaway that you have, just don't go alone, because you'll hate yourself, I promise. And that's from personal experience. I've done it, promise. All right. So, and also, it will slow down your efforts in the long run and also create unnecessary tensions between the departments. So, like I said, just be collaborative, and this is really critical here, especially a part of your discovery process, and just even the implementation, is be collaborative and assemble a dream team. So at the onset of your evaluation, pick an all-star cross-functional. So cross-functional means not just your particular area or function. So if you're in analytics, don't just surround yourself by 2 other analysts. Choose some people in IT, whatever, to actually kind of be your crew for some of that stuff, right? You want to have people that are not afraid to disagree with you. So that you have a healthy challenge process. It will help everything go a lot smoother downstream. So I bet you're wondering, so who is this magical cast of characters, right? So, of course, I would put an analyst first. So first you have your analytics person who's probably your starry-eyed Tableau ambassador. So like they basically can point to the goodness that is Tableau with everything and anything that they talk about, right? So if they're talking about like solving world hunger, it's Tableau can fix it, right? And so they're kind of like, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed on that kind of stuff. Then you have IT. So these are your buddies. These are your roll dogs. These are your wingmen as a part of some of this stuff, right? So they handle things like server management, identity and access management, updates, the technical governance and security considerations, a whole bunch of stuff, right? And basically they help stuff run smoothly on the back end and also help protect some of your data from any people with nefarious purposes. And then finally, you have development. Now, in an ideal world, you'd want data developers on this, but in case you don't have a data development organization, regular developers work just as well, too. And so data is coming from a bajillion sources, like especially as I kind of noted on some previous slides. So you want to make sure that whatever data platform that you choose is compatible with the dark side of the data moon for your organization. So the reason why you want to kind of at least have the bare minimum crew here is because, like, think of this as the people that do the full service check on the plane before your plane takes off. Like, while it's super inconvenient and you just want to get to your destination, imagine what a mid-air emergency is like, right? So you kind of want to tap the brakes a little bit to let them make sure that the engine is working, because I'm not sure about you guys, but nobody wants to build an engine in the air, right? So it just kind of sucks, so let's avoid that. And so the next part of your discovery process, especially kind of going through this step, is you got to know what you're looking for before you talk to vendors, right? Because sometimes if you don't know what's important to your organization, vendors can kind of tell you what you need, and that may or may not be consistent with the needs of your organization and your data structure and all that kind of stuff, right? So have an initial list. So these are just the 5 things that we were looking for, but of course you can kind of add to this. So the first one was ease of use, right? Because we had talked about how everything was so dependent on an analyst or a developer to actually get information to the people, our kind of litmus test was, can a person off the street be able to connect to data and build something useful without a lot of hand-holding, right? Is there like a lot of content and things that they can kind of train themselves if they wanted to? Next was extensive native integrations. This is huge, right? You want right out of the box ways to connect to your data, because if you have to depend on your devs to create some custom connectors for 15 different data sources, that can be a maintenance nightmare that you probably want to avoid, especially when you're on a lean budget. The next thing is advanced analytics capabilities. So, of course, reports and dashboards are fine and they're beautiful, and rainbows and unicorns kind of sprout from them. But especially, you kind of want a 2-for-1, maybe even a 5-for-1 tool, especially when you are on a tight budget. And so you want something that you can utilize for some of the more advanced capabilities like geospatial analysis, clustering, forecasting, whatever. The next thing is security. So, what you want to understand is, can I lock down access to the data and related views without a lot of drama in the background? Or is this going to be more of a free range kind of deal? And also the other thing that you'll want to ask, the vendor or whatever is, what type of precautions are you taking to protect the data that you're pushing into the cloud, especially if you choose a cloud-based, system like Tableau Online. And then finally, the total cost of ownership. Right, this is huge, and it's also something that people don't necessarily take into account when they're looking and evaluating a tool. They always look at, okay, well, this tool costs $5. And they go, this is the cost of the tool, $5. Nope, there's a whole bunch of things that you probably need to consider, like how much does this actually require an entire IT team to maintain and make sure this thing is performant? Or is this something, you kind of want to make sure that, like, all in, that you understand the total cost of this tool. So I'm not sure about you guys, but has anybody seen the Gartner Business Intelligence Magical Quadrant? Okay, awesome. So you can see that there's like 15,000 dots on there, right? And so the business intelligence platform space is probably one of the most competitive spaces I've seen in a while. It's crowded with a lot of big names and cool features. And so we whittled down, because in fact I actually looked at more than Click, Tableau, QuickSight Demo, and Burst, and Power BI. but you don't want to fit too many things on a screen because it gets a little obnoxious. But really just wanted to kind of check out, but these are the main ones. And so what ended up happening was my entire life became a series of demos and sales pitches, right? Like I felt like I was the Oprah of like, oh, you get a demo, you get a, I mean, it was like, I just couldn't breathe anymore. But while it's tempting to skip that stage because you're like, I know that I want Tableau or Click or whatever you want, don't skip that stage, right? Because you want to make sure that you're making a truly informed decision that's right for your organization, right? You want to be able to intelligently speak to the pros and cons of each platform. This will help you navigate some of the conversations internally with people that are not a part of your evaluation process, and also that you can kind of go into anything eyes wide open versus getting surprised and saying, well, I didn't know it didn't do this, right? And so you want to make sure that you kind of handle this in a pretty thorough way. And so also the way I kind of look at like kind of going through these demos, while it kind of sucks that you're having to sit through hours and hours of essentially the same thing, just a different different product name and logo. The way I look at it is that you have to kiss a few frogs to kind of find what's right for you. And so as you can kind of see that we kissed more than a few, but it was worth it. And so surprise, surprise, puppy surprise, we chose Tableau. And I bet it's no shocker here because I doubt that Tableau would have allowed me to talk at their conference had we not selected Tableau. So anyways, like in addition to hitting all the criteria that we had listed out in the previous slide, it kind of surpassed a lot of our expectations on a couple of fronts, right? The product features within Tableau, I mean, you saw the developers on stage. I mean, it's just a robust set. A lot of the features that Tableau has out of the box, other platforms will require you to buy other tools just to kind of get some of that stuff, right? Especially with some of the geospatial stuff or the mapping features. Content is huge, right? Because everybody, like, I'm not sure about you guys, but like I hate having this like really crazy platform that there's not a robust like knowledge repository from. So you have to go to these like you got to search these obscure Reddit forums to figure out how to like do some coding changes and everything else. Experience with business objects. You just got to try and see, and so that took a long time, and no one has time for that, so you don't really want that. But Tableau has an extensive collection of webinars and white papers that kind of transcend just the tool. It kind of goes above and beyond that and talks about just the function of analytics or governance or whatever you want, and also talks about the metrics that are appropriate for your vertical. And then finally, community. The community in Tableau is probably the most mature community for any business intelligence platform that I know of, right? If you get stuck, you have Tableau, not Tableau Public, I'm sorry. You got the forums, because then people will compete to see who has the best right answer. It's kind of funny, but you can take advantage of the geeks of the geeks. I'm one of them, and so you just kind of have some fun there. But also if you need some Vispiration, you can go to Tableau Public, or also some of my personal faves, like Andy Kriebel's VizWiz blog, and they actually utilize Tableau dashboards that you can download and kind of leverage, steal. So the issue with this is now that we kind of found exactly which tool we wanted, there was just really one slight problem with this entire situation. It's not that we didn't have the money, we didn't have an appetite, right? And so, because I was like, guys, this thing can cure world hunger, it's the best thing since sliced bread. I mean, like, I was just like really like as salesy as I could be, and I'm not really like a great salesperson. Like, I was trying to make it work, and essentially, yes, they threw it back at me. And so I had to figure out how I was gonna pay for this, because I knew the solution, but I also couldn't convince someone that, especially as we're getting new into data, to go ahead and give me 6 figures to allow for a massive enterprise-wide implementation, right? And so, and the issue with my perspective on the situation was I was trying to eat the entire elephant in one bite. And so I really had to change my perspective and go, okay, I got to chunk this elephant up in bite-sized pieces and go into phases. Now, of course, in the ideal world, everybody wants to do that one-time enterprise BI rollout, and then you can go about your business, and you create your dashboards, and your life is great. That's not the situation that we were in, especially because we go the speed of tangible value, and we're a show-and-tell kind of organization. So I knew that I had to deploy Tableau in phases. And so the 4 phases that I had was starting small, right? The second one was I wanted to go local with Tableau Online, then go global, and then water the garden. So let's talk about the first phase, is starting small and prove the value. So like I said, this company is more of a let's get a sample, prove a win, and then scale, not scale, and then let's see if this actually works, because everybody's afraid of putting a big investment on the shelf. Nobody has time for that. Nobody wants to waste that budget. And so we started small with a combination of Tableau Desktop licenses and Tableau Reader free downloads, right? And while this was a good first step, it wasn't a great solution for a couple of obvious reasons. It was good because we were creating content that we could be proud of, and that stakeholders were starting to see more friendly content that they can interact with. But the issue with Tableau Reader is that the data is only as good as at the time, down to the second that you have refreshed that dashboard. And also, like you had to manually refresh and overwrite that dashboard, right? So there's a lot of manual interventions that required analysts to actually have to manually push data every day, especially if it was a daily refresh report. So like nobody has time for that. So, and also that led to some major synchronization issues, just because if you have different versions of Tableau Reader and then someone's creating content in a different version of Tableau Desktop, those two things don't hang out with each other. So if one has your stakeholders could be in a situation where they can't even open your stuff up, and then you got to go ahead and babysit, downloading someone's new version of Reader. That sucks. And the thing is, you don't know who has which version. So then you got another situation on your hand. IT doesn't want that problem, so that's a you problem, and then you become like the maintenance person for making sure everybody's Tableau Reader is up to date. Don't do it. It kind of sucks. But it's a good first step, right, as a phase. So obviously the company quickly outgrew that approach, and we needed way more sharing power that didn't require as many manual interventions. And so that kind of led us to our second phase, which is piloting Tableau Online locally. So I was able, with the very little sales skills that I have, to successfully convince 3 business unit leaders to procure about 20 licenses together for us to pilot Tableau Online. So these were the business units that had seen Tableau, and they were like, I want more of that. And well, I was like, well, in order for you to get more of that, right, we're going to need to kind of change this process because we don't have time to kind of go ahead and push this all the time. So I knew, I wanted to make sure that this pilot stuck. So there are certain things that you have to do to kind of make sure that it does, because you can't just expect to get Tableau Online and all of a sudden it's magical rainbows and unicorns. It doesn't work that way. So one of the things I did was I made sure that we established Tableau as the official platform for any and all standard analytics content. So this created an internal incentive for stakeholders to utilize the information, right? Because they just couldn't, depend on you pushing something in Excel or something else. If they wanted to understand their business or get to some of these reports, the only way to roam was through that road, called Tableau. Secondly, I championed the low cost of entry. So for each of those individuals that I kind of convinced, it was $5,000 of entry, and for the entire year. So you were not talking about, 6 figures or tens of thousands. It's like, man, for $5,000, we can make your entire life 8 times easier, and you can get this stuff on the spot. It sold itself, right? And then also, finally, we delighted the customers. So we won the hearts and the minds of stakeholders by leveraging what Tableau does really, really well, which is make impressive visualizations and make their content very interactive, right? Because for the first time ever, people were able to do, it's so crazy, filters. And things, because it wasn't just, you gotta realize that the SSRS reporting, you can do filters in there, but it just, it's a sad little road. So how did it work? Tableau Online was a game changer, not only for the team, but also for the organization and the way that they understood data, right? The first thing is we now had access to fresh information anytime, anywhere, right? So analysts no longer had to manually refresh data sets they had published, and then also those pesky version control issues that we had between Tableau and Reader kind of effectively were eliminated. Additionally, and you guys saw in the, developer on stage, that there's an app that people can log into from anywhere to kind of access their information. Now, here's just a pro tip, y'all. If you create content on a 30-inch monitor, it's not going to look so hot on an iPhone. So, I guess one of the product features I've been asking for is where they automatically change based off of responsive, but they don't have it yet. So create mobile-friendly content for some of your stuff. The next great thing that Tableau Online kind of brought was that governance was relatively easy in Tableau Online, right? I didn't have to have a big IT burden. I was trying to do a nod to Jay-Z. There's only so much that you can do with 99 problems and governances in one. Okay, so anyways, all right, so with a couple of clicks of a button and also using the pre-built administrator dashboards that come out of the box for Tableau Online, we knew where the data was coming from, the last time it was accessed, who accessed it, the last time it was refreshed, versioning, and so much more. So we were easily able to manage user roles, permissions, to ensure that the right people had the right level of access to trusted data, right? And then also, just to make sure that we understood the health of the deployment, we were able to monitor the site and content usage so that we can sunset stuff that wasn't used, and that we can also make sure that everything was kind of performant the way, like load times and things of that nature for all that content. And this is the winner chicken dinner of this entire Tableau thing, right? People, non-technical people, could now get to their own data without a dev or an analyst. This was huge, right? Because it empowered users to kind of consider data as a safe space for them to play in, right? And so they, all the questions that they were kind of shy about asking before because they didn't want to bother somebody, or they knew it was going to take a couple of days to kind of get to that information, they now were empowered to kind of go and, fiddle around with it, right? And so this was huge. You had product managers, marketers, tech support, more that were just exploring and getting familiar with their data. And so there was a lot of great wins that came from non-technical users exploring their data. So a good example of that was a leading indicator. They had noticed that the trend was kind of way off from what they expected. And so they were able to quickly identify what was happening that led to some corrective action that actually increased free trial starts, I think, by 30%. Or the marketer that was able to pull their own segmented email list so they can actually do some customer re-engagements, right? And so analytics and dev no longer became the bottleneck, and so you had multiple ways to get insights to the people for us to kind of drive that business forward. So obviously with all of this hype, the word spread quickly on the street, right? The buzz around data, Tableau, and everything else could never be higher for some of this stuff, right? Data was no longer this elite playground for analysts and devs. It was for everybody, right? So that was a complete cultural shift as it related to data. And so what this really actually translated to was FOMO, which is fear of missing out. There were some people that I'm like, you don't even need that. They're like, I just want it. I was like, okay, cool. Oh, what did I do? So I was like, you can get that. So a video on YouTube, Tableau went pretty viral across the organization. And that in combination with the increased volume of amazing content that the analytics team was creating, that made their data more interactive and engaging, and so the demand for Tableau licenses actually kind of peaked. And so in my mind, this is how I imagined the world, right? I was just going to be like the Oprah of Tableau licenses, and I was like, you get a license and make it rain licenses for everybody, right? But that didn't quite work out, right? I definitely had champagne dreams and a beer budget, which I'm not sure if I'm the only one in the room, but that was the situation. So I knew that at $500 a pop, which is the cost at the time of Tableau Online licenses, they're now called Explorer licenses, that I wasn't going to get this big global approval for another six-figure implementation, right? And so no matter how wonderful the platform was and some of the wins and kind of the ambassadors that were non-technical, there were a big chunk of people that didn't need all that horsepower. They just simply wanted to look at their information, click a couple of buttons, and go about their day, right? Casual users. And so $500 is a little bit steep for just people that want to do that. And so I went from this high of, yes, I found the right thing, and this is the most amazing thing since sliced bread, to now the utter bleak sadness spiral, right? So, There was a notification sent from the heavens. I mean, I almost wanted to sing for y'all because that's how much I feel about this situation, but I'm not because I don't want everybody to leave at once. You know, you can trickle out. But like a phoenix rising from the ashes, my hope was restored. That was because there was an announcement on TechCrunch at like 6 a.m. that basically talked about how Tableau had changed some stuff up. So I'm not sure if y'all saw this announcement last year, but they were like, yes, you know, and I think like this was inevitable because, you know, the market is becoming way more competitive. And also I think that this kind of appears to be Tableau's way of trying to capture the SMB market because the price difference between like Power BI, for example, where it's like $10, versus what they were charging for Explorer, those things were kind of outside the realm of most budgets for small and medium-sized businesses, right? It would be a stretch. And so Tableau recognized that, and they were like, okay, we got to do something different. And so they went with a subscription program, and then, I mean, it was like massive. And so it kind of reopened the conversation of an enterprise deployment because now I didn't have to justify $500 a pop. I was really just talking about $150. For a fully hosted Tableau Online license for the year. So clearly, that's what we were paying for almost everything else, and so it was on par, and it brought back the conversation. And so, not sure if you guys, this is kind of the new like pricing structure or whatever, but of course, like, you know, like insider tip, if you get more licenses, like this, you can always negotiate some of this stuff, so just as FYI. I mean, you guys know this, but so the cool thing about this new Tableau product mix is that I didn't have to procure Cadillacs for people that just needed Honda Civics, right? So there wasn't a lot of waste associated with our mix of Tableau products. And the monthly price point billed annually was essentially that of a fast casual lunch per person, which, you know, when I kind of framed it that way, it made the sell to our organizational leaders much easier. Because they're like, everybody can imagine, because everybody thinks, they look at it in totality and like, oh my gosh, this is so expensive. But then when you break it down, you're like, dude, this is like lunch at Olive Garden. It makes sense. And I'm like, okay, I can do that, right? And so you kind of just, again, you're bringing it down to the bite-sized pieces, and plus you can procure at a user level. So it's not like you're bundling massive amounts of licenses. You can kind of go about your business with that. And so that led me to phase 3, which is scaling the deployment and going global, finally. And just kind of as a reference point, all this stuff happened over the course of about 12 months. Right, so this isn't like all overnight and everything else. There were some waiting periods in here, and sometimes your stuff will go faster and slower. It just depends on the speed of how things move within your organization in terms of approvals, and also just how hungry you are to kind of get the stuff in-house. So equipped with the new product stuff, I was able to kind of right-size our total cost of ownership, because now I can kind of, from our casual users to our kind of power users to now like our experts, I can find the right kind of combination of tools for them. Then I had tech alignment, because remember, earlier into the presentation, I had brought those guys with me during the evaluation and implementation phase, right? So they already knew that Tableau, we had already established that Tableau was our tool of choice. So it wasn't like there was a whole bunch of internal beef where somebody was holding on dearly to SSRS reporting or Power BI or anything else. We had established that stuff up front, so the alignment was fairly easy. And then also we had secured executive champions, because I needed some seed money. And I needed also to make sure that we had the air cover in case there were any kind of cultural reasons why we wouldn't pursue an enterprise BI platform. So that was kind of huge. We didn't run into any issues, but just in case, you always want to have that in your back pocket. And then also what I did specifically was I embedded Tableau Online as a what must be true within the entire data and analytics strategy of the company. Right, so it wasn't just this random thing off to the side. This was center in terms of how we were going to go to the next rung of value, because everybody had bought into the value of analytics because we had a lot of wins. And so I said, okay, if you want some more, in order for that to actually happen, we need to unleash a BI platform that enables us to kind of go to the moon and not have to deal with a whole bunch of low-value requests. So after that, you got the licenses. We had a number of viewer licenses and everything else. The next phase, you're never done, right? So I always say that you want to water the garden, because that, like, you get in the door And the next thing, or you plant, the seeds of Tableau, you want to make sure that it grows. And you can do this also over a number of phases, which is cool, right? And so when we first launched with Tableau Online, we didn't have our Active Directory integration and some of the other stuff. We had some of the bare basics, and then we built, as time went on, the things that we would need to kind of go about doing this stuff. Because the analytics team, essentially, we were the administrators of Tableau, right? So there wasn't an IT burden or a whole bunch of data developers behind us. It was us doing user permissions and a whole bunch of stuff, right? And so I had to kind of go at the bandwidth that we had, and it was okay because everything is secure in some of that stuff, right? And so the first thing I did in order to water the garden is we significantly increased the content associated with within Tableau, right? Because now people had more demand, and we were actually kind of satisfying that stuff, right? So it was pretty awesome. We encouraged data exploration we created the sandboxes. So this is our kind of way to get into data self-service, right? Because before, doing data self-service without those trusted sandboxes was a recipe for disaster, because you didn't know if they hit the right tables and all this other stuff. Well, analysts could actually procure and curate data, sandboxes to answer some of the standard questions that some of their stakeholders would typically have. We also created a robust Tableau user community, especially for the people with creator licenses. So we had trainings and webinars and tips and tricks in our monthly meetings, because we wanted to make sure that this wasn't something that was just this passive thing in our organization that people just used. It was something as a part of it still had the magic associated with the stuff that we wanted in the first place. And then finally, like I mentioned before, just continuing to build up the deployment, right? And so using more of the feature set that actually comes along with it, like Active Directory integration, custom alerts, et cetera. So I know I've said a lot today, but I'm going to kind of wrap this up. But if you get nothing out of this stuff, here are the 5 practical tips, because you're going to run into some hurdles across your BI exploration journey. I'm not sure where everybody is in their journey, but this is really something that helped us along the way. The first one is, don't be afraid to start small, right? Everybody tells you about the magical, one-time implementation. It doesn't always happen that way, and that's okay, right? Figure out what works for you. Figure out how, what's your best path of proving value, and then go and utilize that, right? And so everybody's path is going to look a little bit different, and just, be okay with that. The second thing is identify an executive sponsor. You're going to need some seed money, especially with the initial pilots and things of that nature, unless you have a small budget that you can kind of play with. And so an executive sponsor will provide that funding, or if you have some organizational cultural hurdles, some of the air cover that you may need to even start this conversation and to kind of move forward with it. Tip number 3 is, please make friends with your technology team. Right? They are your friends. And so, simply put, they know stuff that you don't, right? Yes, you can Google everything, but there's certain things that they just reflexively understand and know to look for, and you need to respect that knowledge base because you're going to be better for it, right? That way you're not having to be, everything associated with your evaluation. You can kind of leverage the unique talents that everybody kind of brings. Also, it'll help you avoid building engines in the air. Right? Because if you overlook something that is actually critical or important to your organization, that can be a disaster, especially if you move forward with a procurement. And then the last reason is that if you don't make friends with them, they have the ability to stop your entire implementation in its tracks, right? That is probably the most frustrating on both sides, right? Because you're mad because you're I have all this stuff that I want to do. They're mad because it's why did you try to ignore me and pretend that you didn't have to go through me to get to your deployment, right? And so it just causes unnecessary beefs within the organization. So just all of those things are bad. So just don't, okay? Just be cool, be collaborative. It'll work out in the long run. It might slow up a little bit initially, but you'll go so much faster once you start the deployment and implementation and procurement phases. The next thing is you want to create and nurture demand for Tableau. Right? Simply saying, oh, I want Tableau, and especially if you have a creator license or whatever, start creating that content that wows people. Because you want people to go, well, what's that? How'd you do that? Well, and then, oh, can we do this in Excel? You're like, hell no, I can't do this in Excel, right? And so you get into that, you get that surprise and delight method, and that's huge because, and then also you want to make sure that those non-technical ambassadors, they start speaking the praises of Tableau when you're not in the room. And honestly, it's more authentic coming from them than it is from you, right? Because they are going to assume that you have an agenda because you're the analyst or the IT or whatever. And if it's like a marketer saying, man, this thing is easy, I know I've created this thing, I was able to do this, that speaks volumes louder than anything that you could ever say. So that's huge. And then finally, and not most importantly, but it's actually like a secret weapon here, is our rep, Sean Dowling, was a real MVP during our discovery and implementation phase. Like, as much as you want to know everything, you're just not going to know everything. So sales, like your account reps, they navigate objections and specific technical questions every single day of the week, right? Maybe not on Saturdays and Sundays. And so, like, they save yourself some time and leverage their expertise. Because there was like one thing where, like, one of our IT guys was like, "So where's the data center located?" And I'm like, why does that matter? And quickly they were, I think Sean was like, yeah, it's in, I don't know, Pennsylvania or something like that, right? It was like, and I'm still thinking, well, why does it matter? I'm like 6 months later, I'm still like, why does that matter? But anyways, good luck with your deployment. If you have any questions, let me know, but I appreciate your time. Yeah. So server, what we had, so we're the process of moving buildings. So there's two things. One is that the IT burden they were concerned with like server management and things of that nature. And so to sidestep all of that entirely, we went with the fully hosted stuff, because that way, if it didn't work, there wasn't like a whole bunch of stuff that we needed to tear down after it was done. Anything else? Cool beans. Well, I think the presentation is going to be ready or be sent out, but yeah, I mean, the thing is, it's a windy path. Buckle up and just know that, like, sometimes the way that you kind of go about doing it won't look like somebody else's, and that's okay, right? And so don't get discouraged. Just find different ways and paths to kind of achieve the objective, right? No matter what. So, anyways, thanks, guys.